Joe Rogan and his guest, Michelle Dow, discusses if God really existed or if it has been a lie that convinced millions for years on end.
It's so interesting how these patterns reoccur all over the world. You know, there's a guy in Australia that says he's Jesus, and he runs this whole cult in Australia, and he has this woman who he says is Mary. But the problem is there was another woman who was married before, and it didn't work out with the original Mary. So he tells this new lady, I was wrong about that other lady. You're Mary. And so...
Do you know that they say that the translation for Mary actually was woman?
Oh, wow.
And so that the word possibly just means, I mean, you think about it, there's so many Marys in the Bible, like
Right.
when people talk about Mary Magdalene or Mary, the mother of
Right.
Jesus, or, you know, that it perhaps is just the translation for woman.
Jesus as a historical figure is controversial. There's people that say that there's absolute evidence for Jesus, but then there's people that say, do you know like how much historical record we have on people that lived thousands of years before Jesus? You know, there's people that lived, that they know what they said, they know where they ate, they know where they went, they know so much about them. But the Jesus one is kind of, there's people that say yes, there's historical documents that show he existed, and then there's a bunch of documentaries that you can watch that like, boy, the evidence is kind of sketchy. It seems to be a thought, like a recurring thing in many religions. It seems to be like Hercules, right? It seems to be there's a bunch of these that are like real similar to that, like the child of a god, you know, that comes
Right.
down to fix everything.
There's a lot of traditions where you have a virgin birth. That is
yeah.
true. And I am certainly not here to tell anybody what is true or not true, but the Gospels that are written about Jesus were written after, right? Not during. And that was, you know, common. I mean, Socrates never wrote anything down. He told
Right.
the stories to Plato.
And how long after his death?
Well, I think the first one, now I feel like I am not a historian here, but I think the first one was like 100 years. And so you have Apostle Paul who wrote, but he only saw Jesus after, like he was on the road to Damascus. And so he saw Jesus after Jesus had been crucified and risen. So what he saw was a ghost of Jesus. But the other, you know, Gospels were not written by anyone who had seen Jesus in that way, even though they were the versions like of when you have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. These are the versions that they were told. So I don't know, maybe 100 years?
Yeah, so this is where belief hits for people that are listening to this right now. Because there's going to be a certain percentage of people right now that have their hackles up because someone might be insinuating that maybe all this Jesus stuff is not legit. And that's not what anybody's saying. What we're saying is these stories were written down 100 years after he was alive. And people are full of shit. That's it. It doesn't mean that he didn't exist. Because if someone did exist, like if the early emergence of humans in the world, let's imagine what they mean by this story. If the early emergence of humans in this world were put down here to figure it out on their own, like a bunch of latchkey kids from the 1970s, figure it out on your own. I'm going to give you ways to live your life. Tell everybody, but I'm hands off. I'm hands off. I'm an afterlife type of guy. I'm not going to come down and explain it again, pop out of the clouds and freak everybody out. I did that once. I did it once. I'm done. You guys killed me. So I'm just saying, live your life this way. If that was a real thing, what would be any different than the Bible? What would be any different about if a real event like that actually happened, where the Son of God came down and explained to mankind what they're doing wrong and lived this amazing life and taught so many people, and they spread his wisdom and they spread his information? It wouldn't be any different than the Bible, because you're still, even if it was like very clear what he was saying and very clear what he had done and the impact and how they all knew he was the Son of God, by the time 100 years go by, people talking about it, who the fuck knows? Who knows?
Yeah, but you know what Jesus did really well? So Jesus didn't write anything down, right? Like, he was a storyteller. Jesus told a lot of parables, and those are easier to remember. So if you listen to like his Sermon on the Mount or, you know, these various things, it's possible that some of these stories, which they can be interpreted more than one way. But like, to say that, have you heard the expression casting pearls to swine?
Yes.
Okay,
what does
right.
that mean?
Well, in the story of the prodigal son, there was this, and Jesus tells this story, right? So there's these two brothers, and one brother stays and does everything that his father wants him to do. And the other brother says, give me, the son, he says, the younger son says, give me my inheritance now. I don't want to wait till you're dead. Just give me my inheritance now. I want to go experience life. And the father gives his younger son his inheritance. And this young man who is raised well goes out and hires prostitutes, does all the things, right? And lives this loose life. And he finds that he runs out of money. And he is in a pen of pigs, and he is willing to eat what even the pigs won't eat, like the leftovers. And he is face down in the mud according to the story, in the pig pen, and says, even if I was a servant from my father, I'd be treated better than this. And so he goes back, etc. And his older brother is really upset because the father brings the son back and treats him, he's just so grateful his son's returning to him. And his brother says, or an expression like, you're casting pearls to swine. I mean, like, my brother is a pig. My brother is like, from the pig pen, and you're giving him something that he doesn't deserve. And that whole story, I mean, you can interpret it any way you want, but this idea that you tell stories like this and someone could say, God is willing to take you back, and perhaps even better if you have experienced life, and that just being obedient isn't the only way to live a life. Maybe I don't know what the real interpretation is, right? But like, when you read a story like that, or you hear the story, Jesus didn't write it down, but if he told that story, then now people come to that and they think, what does that mean? Does that mean when I find myself in a pig pen that I can repent and go back? What does it mean?
Isn't it funny that Jesus is a storyteller?
Yeah, I love
Because a
that.
storyteller is the person who stands in front of people and commands attention. And we know how that goes. Right?
Yeah, well, you're a storyteller.
Well, sort of.
You don't think you're a storyteller?
I talk shit on stage, so it's just jokes. And
But those are stories.
some of them are stories, yeah. Some of them are just making fun of things. Yeah. It's different than someone who tells you stories and imparts wisdom. Like if someone's standing in front of a group of people imparting wisdom, that's a very bizarre relationship. It's a very slippery position for the person that has the podium. Very slippery, because you could start believing all this nonsense. You could start believing that you're different than everybody else. You could start believing that you are the Son of God. Even if I'm not even talking about Jesus. I'm talking about someone today. Someone today, even today, in this day and age with the internet. If you started doing something like that and you're schizophrenic, you could believe it.
Lots of people
Yeah.
believe they're the Son of God right now.
Yeah, 100%, legit. And then lots of people believe that other people are demons. There's a lot of real funky beliefs that people hold on to.
In this next segment, Joe Rogan talks about how the Bible isn't what people think it is.
Terence McKenna once said it best, that science asks of you one miracle. That's the Big Bang.
Yeah.
There's one miracle. It really is kind of like a miracle.
Yeah.
If in the beginning there was nothing, and then God created the earth and the skies. And it's essentially what the Bible is trying to say. They're just doing it in a way.
And the Bible got it right. They got the order right.
Right. I think it's based on an understanding that people had achieved. Because if you think about the Bible, right, and if all these people are correct about the original history of sophisticated civilization, if the Randall Carlsons and the Graham Hancocks and the Robert Shocks of the world and the John Anthony West, if they're correct in the timeline of, say, the most sophisticated society that we are aware of, which is Africa, if those people that lived in Africa 30,000, 40,000 years ago in Egypt, if they created a society that was infinitely more sophisticated than anything that we had ever seen before, how did they do that? Who did that? And what was that like? What the fuck was that like? What was that world like back then? I mean, have you ever really stopped and tried to think and imagine what was that world like back then? I mean,
Well, how about that you have a similar world in Central and South America, where they also had built things many thousands of years ago that still, how the fuck did you do that?
Yeah, how'd you do that?
Easter Island. How did y'all make those things?
Yeah.
How in the world? And then move them?
Well, I think if those things go down and then people have to rebuild, I think it takes a long time before people figure out what happened. I think it takes a long time. And I think that's where a lot of the confusion that you see in the Bible comes from. Like God made the earth and the sky and everything in like 6 days, right? And on the 6th day he rested. Okay, what are they actually saying though? You're getting things that are translated from an oral history of 1,000 years, and then they're writing it down in Aramaic, they're writing it down in ancient Hebrew, and you're getting it many years later, long after.
Diluted and warped.
All kinds of. Think about what people are willing to do today to the Constitution. Today, with all the information that we have about the dangers of this. Think about what they're trying to do today. Now imagine what you would do if you had the real knowledge of the birth of the solar system, of the development of human beings, and the God energy of the universe, and you tried to translate it over an oral history because there's chaos, because there's no more cities anymore, and everyone's dead. And you're just like hunting and gathering as cave people, and you're trying to relay this origin story of mankind. And then it gets written down in parables, and it gets written down in Latin, and it gets translated over the years. And then people try, okay, then they sit down and they look at it many years later and they go, what the fuck were they trying to say? Like, what were they trying to say? Because so much of what they're trying to say, if you're really paying attention, like it seems like it's kind of laid out like the origins of the universe. If in the beginning there was nothing, like they're talking about the Big Bang. If these scientists all agree, how did they know that
then
back
there was
then?
light. That would be the Big Bang.
Why wouldn't they assume back then that God was always around? Why would they assume that God had to make everything? Why would they assume that there was a beginning and an end? Just because they have a beginning and an end? Is that rational? Why would they assume that? And why did everybody assume that? Maybe because they fucking knew. Maybe because at one point in time, whether it's 10,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago, they had figured a lot of this shit out.
Well, someone figured something out for everything, the pyramids and the way that they were built, to be aligned so perfectly with a true north, and
just to be able to construct them. If those people were that smart, why wouldn't we imagine they had an understanding of the birth of the universe? Why wouldn't we imagine that they would have this bizarre understanding of the way morality and good and evil play out with human beings? Maybe they were right. Maybe they were right, but it all just got fucked up over the thousands of years after asteroid impacts and the thousands of years of the destruction of the advanced civilizations and the world going back into chaos and then slowly rebuilding. And you're rebuilding with these ancient texts that you find in clay pots in Qumran. And that, you ever seen when they translate like the Dead Sea Scrolls and they lay them out and they have to try to figure out which pieces go with which scroll, and they do it based on DNA. All this DNA is from this cow, so let's take this scroll from this cow skin and put it together and try to read what the fuck they said. It's incredible, but it makes sense. It makes sense if you buy into the idea that there's been a restart of civilization, and then you go back and say, okay, what is the history of the Bible? Like, how old is it? What's the oldest version? Like, what's the oldest version of the stories?
Like, who knows?
Right, who knows? Version. Right, what was the original? Like, you're playing a game of Telegram, right, or telephone with over 1,000 years, with who knows how many people. But if we've seen what the Egyptian people were able to build, what was that like? How sophisticated were they? And maybe what we're getting at in the Bible is just the longest game of telephone of a true story. It's just all kind of gumbled up in stories, and God's testing you and all this thing about, God telling this guy to kill his kid. It's just a little screwed up, but it's showing you that there are evil forces at play, and there are temptations that you must resist
lessons
those.
in a story that you can understand.
Exactly,
and that's
but at
why
the heart of
7
it, there's
days,
some truth to it.
Because what is a day to God?
Yeah, what does that mean?
Is that a billion years?
Yeah.
1,000,000 years?
100 billion?
Who knows?
Who fucking knows?
Yeah.
Who knows?
But it's presented in a way that you can digest it.
Yes. And then our version of it is this simplified, uneducated, barbaric version that gets translated from people that are involved in sword fights. They're fighting each other with swords and hacking each other to death for thousands of years while they're telling this story. The Crusades, All these different things that people did during that time, horrific things. And during that time, they're doing it, many of them, in defense of their God, in defense of their religion. They're motivating people by these books.
Yeah.
It's fascinating stuff. It's fascinating. But when you hear a guy like Tucker Carlson saying that what else do you know, bro? Say what you know. Like, what makes you say that? Because if that really is what it is, that would make sense to me why the government would keep that information from people. Because if we found out that people were essentially just a vessel of souls and that we are essentially designed to give birth to artificial intelligence, and then that will be the end of us. So that's why they're not worried about nuclear war. That's why they're not worried about the environment. That's why they don't give a fuck about anything. This is all coming to an end.
We're there.
Yeah.
Like, we have it. We have it to the degree that people are already relying on it heavily.
Yeah.
Advertising agencies are relying on it to tell them how to cut a commercial, how present the logo needs to be in the commercial. Like, this is happening right now.
Oh, yeah.
This shit just appeared 3 years ago.
Right.